There has been a lot to do about Battlefield 5 recently, a fan favourite franchise to many, including myself. But let's be honest here, the reveal trailer for it wasn't very good, whichever way you look at it, and whatever your viewpoint is on the matter shown in it. But now a lot of arguments springing up talk about historical accuracy, and if DICE has an obligation here to portray history in the game in a certain light. But is that really the case? So let's have an actual look at how previous Battlefield games have handled this. Is it really a case of inaccuracy, or is it something else? And before we get started with that, just roll the intro, right? As you are probably aware, the Battlefield franchise started in 2002 with Battlefield 1942, potentially one of the all-time gaming first-person shooter multiplayer classics, which is quite a mouthful. But that's not really where things got started for developer DICE, mostly known by then for Volvo-sponsored rally games. But this little-known tiny Swedish studio would aim for the stars with their acquisition of studio Refractor Games, who had published a game called Codename Eagle, the first to feature the signature Refractor engine featured in Battlefield 1942, Vietnam, and an updated version for Battlefield 2. And the game Codename Eagle can nowadays be seen as a sort of spiritual predecessor to Battlefield 1, mostly because it shares the same time frame and unique World War I setting. This game had all the mechanics a true Battlefield game would have. It had a rather mediocre single player for its time, but also featured a multiplayer in which you could do pretty much anything you wanted. It was the start of those crazy C4 stunt videos made popular after Battlefield 2, although back then it was just sticks of dynamite, I guess. The game was, however, anything but a historically accurate retelling of battles taking place in World War I, and was more focused on mixing World War I as viewed from popular culture with biplanes, zeppelins, turn-of-the-century cars, trucks, and Indiana Jones-style tanks. It also featured an action espionage setting, which was popular at the time, with games like 007 GoldenEye coming to mind. And although it looks a lot like a Battlefield game, things wouldn't really kick off for DICE until 1942. Battlefield 1942 is pretty much the mother of sandbox-style multiplayer video games, and popularized the genre and spawning a full-on gaming franchise. It is, however, not a historically accurate masterpiece. Wait, we're really starting with that one? Okay then. Well, alright. Let's be honest here, the game is not a historical simulator. Although Battlefield 1942 features many things authentically World War II, it also has too many inaccuracies to count, mostly because it's not trying to be a simulator along the lines of, say, Red Orchestra or the new Post-Scriptum. The landing on Omaha Beach, a several kilometers long beach in real life, is portrayed as a box canyon that looks nothing like its real life equivalent. The Allied forces portrayed in Battlefield 1942 all used the British Patton Lee Enfield as its sniper and engineer weapon across all the Allied factions. Historically, all the factions had their own surface rifle. The assault class, seen as the basic infantry soldier that leads the fight, fields a Browning automatic rifle, or BAR, historically only used as a squad support weapon. And back in early interactions of the game, the Japanese would exclusively employ German small arms too. The Tiger tank, known during the war as a heavy tank and employed as such, is countered in the Allied team by the M10 tank destroyer, a tank with lighter armor than, say, a Swedish Volvo. Seriously, this thing could take more of a pounding than this thing. Historical context for the battles you fight is only provided by load screens. And this works because you wouldn't want to be slapped with exposition about World War II while you're trying to play an online multiplayer game. You're not playing a documentary after all. I do think it is important to realize that the first Battlefield in the franchise was not a historical masterpiece, a simulator for example like some of the games previously mentioned, but rather aimed at being a fun, arcade-style multiplayer shooter, in which it was, in my opinion, groundbreaking for its time, and for developer DICE, it wouldn't stop there. Battlefield Vietnam would follow up 1942 2 years later, and within reason, it is probably the most historically accurate video game in the franchise. The battles portrayed in it, the equipment used, and the scale of those battles comes very close to the major battles that were a part of the Vietnam War. The game again provides its context through loading screens. Maps like Quang Tri and Hue are by and large based on the actual thing, but of course as scaled down versions. Its Quezon map, for example, looks quite a bit like the actual thing, and the complaints about equipment are far from on the same scale as the game that preceded it. But again, the game is much more about having fun while playing it rather than portraying a completely historical setting. And I think with that, we're stumbling into an entirely different topic. What if the problem with Battlefield isn't so much its factual historical correctness, but rather individual suspension of disbelief? Are you logically able to accept a large amphibious landing craft weighing more than a Huey helicopter could ever carry being slung underneath it and dropped on a North Vietnamese T-54 tank that is trying to shoot it down? It's a subjective question, and its answers too differ from person to person. And with that, we could, for example, talk more about Battlefield Heroes, Battlefield 1943, and the modern and sci-fi battlefields. But I don't think that would serve an exact purpose anymore, considering we seem to have hit the core of the issue. The modern battlefields also don't portray historical conflicts. They often feature equipment or factions that exist in real life, but those games are more focused on providing balance between the factions than actually portraying a current or previous conflict accurately. So that really leaves us with one more game to look at. Battlefield 1. Battlefield 1 is DICE's return to form, completing the cycle back to where it all started, with codename Eagle. Era-wise, anyway. It attempts to portray the horror of World War I in its single player, it gives context to the war via its war stories, but does not attempt to recreate that feeling in multiplayer to a T. It features both historical and unhistorical battles, like for example the fictional Battle of the Suez Canal and the true-to-life battles of Caporetto or the Somme. As far as I'm aware, next to DICE's own research team, internet historian Indian Idell and the crew from the Great War Channel did do research on a number of things, including medals and potential firearms used in the game. That much is stuck in my memory at least. But much of that had to be gamified in order to fit the game's requirements. By and large, the game features period-correct equipment, from rifles to uniforms, and from vehicles to even its behemoth mechanic, but again, are employed in a gamey manner, which is demonstrated by the widespread prototype or limited fielded semi- and full automatic weapons or armoured vehicles like the Char 2C, which didn't enter service until 1921, 3 years after the war had actually ended. Another point that is brought up a lot is that the game doesn't mean to portray the war accurately, but rather authentically. So what makes a game authentic other than the previously mentioned suspension of disbelief? Its dictionary definition puts authenticity at the degree to which something or someone is true to its personality, spirit, or character. So basically, it poses the question, is the game true to the spirit of World War I? And I could argue and give you a yes or no answer. But Battlefield's supposed authenticity is as subjective as it is personal. I could make the argument, for example, that 32 players running around with semi or fully automatic rifles is not authentic to the spirit of World War I, and hold up video games like Verdun as being a beacon of authenticity for showing bolt-action rifles and the removal of run-and-gun gameplay. And you could argue the opposite. We could both be right. To me, however, personally, the only place where Battlefield 1 tries to accurately portray the war in an authentic manner is in its single player with its war story, Storm and Steel, in which every time you die, you portray a new member of the Harlem Hellfighters. It tells you the name of the person you fought as, their date of birth, and their date of passing. And in my own frame of reference, it perfectly describes the futility of the fighting that happened during most of World War I. But once again, in a way, it is almost more artistic in its portrayal of World War I than actually historic. So armed with knowledge about suspension of disbelief and having looked back at the previous Battlefield games, let's look at the new Battlefield. The trailer for Battlefield 5 doesn't have its pacing down. It's an adrenaline-fueled trip from minute 0 to minute 2, and it's difficult to focus on any specifics with so much shit happening everywhere. Historical accuracy-wise, the same problems jump out as the previous Battlefield games. A Matilda tank is shown towing a German flak gun in combat. A V1 rocket is shown employed as a tactical weapon. We briefly see the Churchill gun carrier, a prototype tank never employed in the field, and the player is seen running and gunning with a rather heavy MG42 in maneuvers that would probably break my back or neck or anything in between, for real. And then there's the most controversial topic, namely this British para with a samurai sword on his back. Which I say in jest, although I have to admit it bothered me a little when I first saw it, having gotten used to games like Postscript and Verdun and etc., where everyone is dressed more uniformly. No, the true topic of conversation is this amputee woman. Now again, we could apply both historical accuracy and authenticity, but would that really matter? What DICE is trying to do here, as it did with previous Battlefield games, is not to be historically accurate. So there is no point in making this argument again, as we've examined. A 1940s Matilda tank is historically not going to face a 1942's Tiger tank on a battlefield potentially in the Netherlands around 1944. It's just not a scenario that would have played out. They are trying to portray the spirit of World War II, of course, but that authenticity has always had to make room for fun in any Battlefield game that came before it. And as we have discussed, shortcuts have always been taken to provide the player the best experience. The feeling that the trailer gives me is that it's not trying to specifically appeal to the old school Battlefield 1942 / Forgotten Hope mod / Project Reality type / Red Orchestra player. It is trying to, or has always tried to, interest the most mainstream of gamers to it. That is what a AAA game is. And right now, in the spirit of the times, arcadey fun, ease of play, ease of control, and customization options are the trend. Therefore, I think that the authenticity complaint is only valid up to a certain point. Yes, it is true that women served in a limited frontline capacity in Allied armies, and we should talk about this. Individual women, however, have played pivotal roles behind the lines, or on the front lines in Soviet service. So, is it wrong to portray women in such roles in Battlefield, even though they historically might not have or have in limited roles? And is it wrong to portray an amputee in that way? And here is where it comes down to your own subjective suspension of disbelief, your own willingness to suspend critical faculties to believe something surreal. Surrealism, which Battlefield has always taken inspiration and elements from when it comes to its multiplayer gameplay. A 1940s portrayal of the Battle of Narvik in Norway, with British forces fielding the German Sturmgewehr 43, fighting Germans driving Tigers and Sturm Tigers, which weren't developed by that time, taking on British Matilda tanks, is nothing but surrealism. But portraying a woman in that, or an amputee, would be too much. And if that doesn't make you want to play the game, then that is perfectly fine as well. Personally, I'm on the fence about it too. I barely played Battlefield 1, for example, and I'm not sure this one warrants another investment. Personally, I would like to see more of the game before it comes out, which DICE is trying to do. But I'd like to make it clear that DICE doesn't have an obligation to historical correctness, and it has never really tried to create a true-to-life video game. I would seriously guard against mistaking your own suspension of disbelief, which is subjective and differs from person to person, with Battlefield's own brand of authenticity. Not everyone is going to have the same opinion on this game, and it's not like the old games won't exist anymore after this comes out. You can still play those games at any time. Like the original Star Wars trilogy, its reputation remains unblemished. And there are, of course, games like Postscriptum and Red Orchestra. Battlefield hasn't ever attempted a level of historical accuracy, authenticity, or simulation that those games attempt to portray, and there are still plenty of fish in the sea when it comes to these kinds of games. And that was it for this episode of GC. Thank you so much for watching. As an old school Battlefield player, this is a topic close to my heart, and the discussion around it that I've been seeing has done nothing but make me a little sad at the state of gaming. Even though most of the discussion has been hitting the right notes, there are some who have completely derailed it, and I'm looking specifically at you /r/Battlefield. But anyway, you can help the channel out by hitting the like button under this video and by turning on notifications. But I'd also like to really hear from you in the comments. On the last video, for example, Goose wrote, "Trucks!" And that's the kind of quality comment I expect from you too. Until we meet again, this was Henk for GC, signing off.